So great. Yeah, meeting again with Richard.
Yeah. Hello.
Uh,
Hi, Adam.
hey, Richard. So we were going to talk about um, painting and art, well, art and AI. And we have just been discussing how um, successful your business has been in terms of people, there's a hunger for genuine expression and doing creative stuff. And now I've been wondering, um, myself being into philosophy, also like I can see that this idea, this um, the culture of talking about philosophical or metaphysical stuff, has really picked up. And you said like, yeah, in America especially, people like it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting thing in that sense because we're going to talk about art and AI and the kind of, there's a few levels to this. So I use the platform called Threads, which is, Instagram's version of Twitter, basically. And it's very interesting actually because it's new and people are kind of redefining it and not redefining it, but trying to define it as a platform. But there's a lot of debate on there about art and AI, and there's a lot of quote unquote AI artists on there, and then a lot of traditional painters, and a lot of people talking about it, and this kind of threat of AI to traditional art forms or traditional mediums. So there's that aspect, I think, that we can discuss in that sense of whether it's a existential threat to the human hand, to the tragedy of the kind of tortured artists, But then there's the other aspect of AI, and Adam and I were just talking in that sense about how, I've been able to use certain elements of AI or computers or social media to basically become really successful as an artist, but not only, selling my work, but teaching online, and how these sort of platforms and the globalized nature of the world now, how people are able to get this authentic experience of painting with real materials, learning from a real artist, but using this sort of this technology. So I think there's different strands to it and things that we could discuss.
Totally, yes. I think because the first thing, I have some friends who are artists also, other than I know you and a few other people, and one reaction was like very visceral when these first AI generative AI pictures came up, right? And people started, like you said, they became like AI artists, and suddenly there's a thing, and there's this friend of mine who's like, but like people don't like this because it's not real, it's not, there's all that artificiality about that. So obviously there's that aspect when it's actually what is supposed to be generated by a human being is then generated by a machine, and how does it then reflect the actual value of art, and what does it do to our understanding of what art we understand art as. That's one thing. But then the second thing is, obviously we don't want to be Luddites, because the technology is inexorable. It will continue. It will, we are technological species. We create tools. That's how we got to where we are. And like you said, myself also, like let's say Zoom technology and being digitalized kind of materials and so on liberated me in my practice, like teaching, coaching, to meet people and serve people through these digital means, like yourself teaching art through Zoom to another country. And
Absolutely.
I think it's so important that we take advantage of this, and yet we don't get sucked into the kind of brainwashing into everything AI and everything digital and everything like this. There's a I think it will be increasingly important for us to be able to distinguish, like to draw the line, to what extent I want my life easy, automated, like, smooth, frictionless, because that's going to bring more and more that digitalization and automatization will bring in. Everything will be more and more frictionless and easy and cheap. But then you end up, okay, but what happens to life when everything's so easy? You end up not actually making effort. So some things, like human relationship, it makes sense to go out there. And like today, for example, there's a person, I have a meeting, and I decided to take time to meet the person in analog, because I'd rather have that eye contact. I'd rather spend 2.5 hours or 3 hours rather than 1 hour over Zoom, just so I can meet them, and we can share space, physical space together, right? So there's that. And I feel like when I was asking about the, let's say, renaissance in people's interest in art, perhaps we have been so dissociated through having to deal with, being on the computer a lot. Sometimes it's too much, and it's so easy to just, overdose our use of technology these days. Especially, it's built that the addictive patterns are built into the infrastructures that make us stay on these platforms. And then I think I already heard from several of my clients and read some things around space that, we, like COVID, for example, the lockdowns and all of that kind of isolation from each other made us really appreciate human relationship. Maybe in the same sense, you're talking about like generative AI and people being skeptical of these, art being created by machines. Perhaps this is a catalyst for me. It seems to be that this is the catalyst, that when there's an existential threat to human expression, to human creativity, there is it rings a bell. It's like, hang on a minute, now I should really, now this becomes of real value to have an embodied sense of doing art and doing
Absolutely.
right, like having this hands-on experience becomes like a big deal, because before we didn't see the difference. It's always been like done like that, but suddenly when there's like, I can have virtual artificial experience, or I can have a real experience, right?
Definitely. Well, it's very interesting, and this is something, especially during the 20th century, has been it's been a narrative that has been going on in the art world a lot. I'm not an art historian, but I know a little bit about it from my studies. But the kind of let's say the threat to painting has been there. I mean, photography is a massive example of this. That when photography started to come around, it did provide an existential threat to painting, and especially painting as people knew it, because a lot of it would be society portraiture and portraits of people with money, and that's how artists made their money. But then, why paint when you could get a photograph, right, of these people? And this sort of technological threat, or the innovation, meant that traditional painters had to look for different ways of expression. That kind of first wave is not what I'm that interested in terms of photography, but it's more around the second wave of it, around Impressionism, where it wasn't only photography that became a little bit more portable and easily accessible, the equipment slightly lighter, but things like the railway network started to open up around France. And this meant that artists could actually sort of leave the studios and start painting plein air and on location. You had photography as well, which could render a landscape much more perfectly than painting could. However, what this done to painting is it's painting kind of it re-established itself as a very human medium, a very analog medium, where it wasn't necessarily reality that the artist was trying to depict, but the impression of the reality. And you get Monet and people like that who then take paint into this new kind of language. It pissed off the academies, it pissed off all of the right people, because it was a time for painting to not only break free from its tradition, but establish itself as a unique visual language within a world of new technological change. But very much.
You're talking 50s, 60s, no? This?
Sorry?
1950s, 60s?
Oh, no, much before that. So let me just, yeah, much before it. I'll just look it up. So Impressionism.
Monet, yeah, so that's probably 19th.
So it's the 19th century, so it's late 19th
century.
Late
19th into the 20th century, yeah.
And
then after World War II, we get all these like really crazy, like
yeah, where we start to get sort of abstraction and things like that. So artists is one of these things which is an evolutionary process, and during modernism, you have this idea, and I think we touched on it before, where an art movement is basically destroying the last art movement. It's this kind of, out with the old, in with the new, and then the new.
Dadaism.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. All
of that radical.
Yeah, so it's radical, and eventually you end up with postmodernism, and that actually sort of ties in then with the internet and digital. Because the internet gives us access to all of this information in different sources and different viewpoints, that the old ideas of modernism, of one sort of juggernaut going along and just getting rid of the old for the new, get rid of the old for the new, in this sort of cyclical way. Postmodernism, because of technology, and especially digital photography, Photoshop, and the internet, takes art into this new kind of realm where people say, well, I know that painting in a Renaissance style isn't in, but I'm going to do it anyway. And whilst I do it, I'm going to be listening to the Beastie Boys on my iPod or something like that. And, I'm going to put pop culture references into my Renaissance painting, things of a globalized world in there. So this thing, it shatters it and people start to form it. So that's when you really start to see the idea of artists using technology but are not seeing it as a true threat. And this is why I don't think AI is a threat. If we were during in times of modernism, I think it would be, but nowadays it's not. It's just another thing.
Yeah, so that's interesting how you started with photography and painting and the reaction to that, because that's what when I studied music again, it was I was writing about that a lot, how the Walter Benjamin and work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, that was a big text at the early 20th century, when he actually came up with this idea that the real work of art has an aura. There's an aura to it, like it's like a magical medium in a way, because it's been labored over and it's an inspired piece of work. And then he claimed that you can then have a copy of an analog work of art, but it's always going to be a copy. There's always going to be an original. But then with mass production, you have this idea, this unprecedented idea of a copy without an original, because what is a CD? What is a photograph? The negative of the photograph is not the original, is a negative, so it's a blueprint. But then the first product is the copy already, and then so it kind of is like the soul of art is being sucked out of it by having it reproduced. And then look what. So on the one hand, you have people like maybe Impressionism to really emphasize this surrealist and subjectivity, right? So then also we have beginnings of psychoanalysis, right? And then they really play on that impressionism becoming this very subjective experience of the artist, and amplifying color, and like even like Van Gogh style is really much
Yeah.
like that, right? But then look on the other side, what I found really interesting, and that's later again, that's Warhol, which is
Still,
67.
yeah, 50s into 60s.
Yeah, and look what he's done. So he's actually, instead of rebelling against it, he actually embraced the consumerism, and he made the repeatability as a concept in itself.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating, even though, because like also when I look at like music or art in this time of, yeah, especially postmodernist or avant-garde, latter post-war basically West, and we have all these people like really really radical this destruction of harmony, of melody, and same with, you know, in art, this abstract expressionism with destruction of form, and
Yes.
really like pushing the boundaries of what, like, of content, what is content, what is the medium, and Rothko, and what I found really fascinating in all of that, really, all of that style, is maybe the work of art itself becomes less important than the statement that it makes about the culture from which it has emerged.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is very much, you know, when with conceptual art and with again with the kind of a postmodern idea. I mean, I went to art gallery in Norwich yesterday, and you know, you've got sort of very old art, some Roman art, you know, next to Francis Bacon. I mean, it's fascinating. But then the much more contemporary conceptual art downstairs, where it's not so much about the aesthetics of the work. It's much more about the ideas. So it was on gender fluidity, for example. Within certain cultures, so you can see it's like that's what the art is about. Whereas they had in there Giorgio Morandi, who was an Italian painter who just painted similar still life arrangements over and over and over and over again in his own style. So you see a big difference there. That's not about concept, you know, that's about sort of a meditative contemplation of form within painting. And it's interesting with, I mean, the Holocaust, the Second World War, a lot of those artists, very much like many of the Frankfurt School guys, a lot of the artists that abstract expressionism, they were kind of sort of channeling in many ways these kind of ideas. So it was Adorno who said there can be no poetry after Auschwitz.
After Auschwitz, yes.
Yes, yes.
Trauma is the great.
Yes. What, you know, Mark Rothko is for me the most interesting abstract expressionist, you know, because he's painting these absolute, I mean, all form has dissolved, you know.
Yeah, I love him as well. The stuff, it's so hard to justify because it's simply, like you say, it's such a reductionist style, but the density of the color, maybe, I don't know, like the consistency of the form that those artists like Mondrian is the same. Mondrian, you need to watch the progression from his early days through decade after decade after decade, and you see the journey of looking at the shapes from zooming in, out. You know, there's just a whole universe of one shape.
Absolutely,
right?
And that's, you know, it's that kind of resonance within it, and you know, Mondrian and Kandinsky and all of those guys, you know, pushing that form. So, you know, after Impressionism comes Cubism, the form is breaking up, and with Rothko you get this kind of lineage even within this work, that you look back to Caravaggio and the Renaissance and stuff like that there's this kind of eternal tragedy within it, but within these kind of voids. And it's very interesting talking about Warhol, because there's sort of a famous anecdote about Rothko bumping into Warhol in the streets, and shuddering and turning away because, he saw this kind of, Warhol, this guy that was kind of embracing this kind of advertising, popular culture, technological culture, mass media, doing these screen prints. I mean, what painter does screen prints, man? It's a form of, commercial technology. So Rothko had this kind of moment of shuddering in the streets, because his work was about the tragic, the eternal, the struggle.
Right, the great tragedy of the artist still. And that's something that Baudrillard was talking about, like with Nietzsche, at the end of the 19th century. We still could have that tragic philosopher, tragic, artist struggling in the great cadaver of history, and kind of observing the tragedy of history and seeing these forces consuming humanity and so on. And it can have that pathos, but following the kind of consumerist culture, when human perception and human consciousness becomes so sedated, so infantilized, it's almost as if there's no ground for that kind of message. It's being consumed by, again, like, I think, yeah, what's his name again? The one you just mentioned,
Warhol.
Warhol, yes. So Warhol's embracing it is actually grimmer, because it transcends the fear, it transcends but it is aware of it still. It's still aware of the kind of, of the decline, but it embodies the decline, because those people were also they were like hardcore bohemian crowd, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And look, and so this, let's say, industrial technology of making art becomes art in itself. And then what does it mean? Is, in one way, it could be seen as mockery of the true art, right? As Rothko perhaps would see it. But then on the other hand, there's this thing called, like, it emerges that you need to have a certain strategy. You need to adapt a strategy to take in art in the 20th century onwards. Because it's same with John Cage and Brian Eno and all of those, Xenakis and all of those avant-garde composers. Same thing. So if you want to listen to Xenakis in the same way you listen to the Beatles, you're missing the point. You will just hear noise but you need to look at the context. You need to understand why the person is doing with sound what they are doing, and it, same with Warhol, what motivates this perspective of aesthetics? How does it pierce through the noise through the cultural noise to actually make a statement about that culture? And that becomes philosophy, really. That becomes philosophy of art, and as an art in itself. So it dissolves into this talking about it rather than actually, maybe doing it. But it's fascinating, though. I always love these composers, just how it becomes philosophy. The act of art becomes philosophy.
Yes. Well, this is where, art in many ways also became a kind of a knowledge industry, a philosophy industry, rather than just something that was purely about the making of art. And I often sort of moan a bit. I mean, my degree wasn't that bad, my degree course, but and a lot of it was me not engaging how I should in it. But in many art degrees now, a lot of art students join them and become slightly disappointed, because they're more engaged in Frankfurt School literature than they are in actually painting, because art become much more about ideas than it did about the actual practice of making it. And in many ways, this is why contemporary art has is, you know, a lot of people are disengaged with it, normal people, for example, because it become very much a kind of an academic pursuit or a philosophical pursuit, that you could have a very, very solid idea behind the art, and that the work either not be that up to scratch technically, or, you know, as I mean, I'm using a cliche here, that it could be a piece of paper screwed up into the ball in the center of a gallery, but the idea is solid, you know. It's and I'll just say about art as well that, you know, and I can't remember the timeline right, but I think it either preceded pop art or after abstract expressionism, or it was or running parallel or as a response to it, but was minimalism. Now, I know the minimalist aspect in regards to its response to abstract expressionism, that Rothko, Pollock, all of these people were very much these tragic painters who had the human, and this relates to AI as well, it had this human touch to it. You look at Jackson Pollock, I mean, flinging the paint around on the floor, fag in his mouth, you know, totally drunk out of his head. And Rothko there sitting in his studio, you know, contemplating suicide as he's looking at these, literally looking at these huge, you know, tragic paintings. But then minimalism came in, where the idea was to actually remove the human element.
Remove the author, yes.
Remove the author and actually start making these paintings, these statements, these material statements that have no tragedy in them.
No human agency.
No human agency, to the point where they were, you know, made in industrial units by a team of kind of non-artists in, you know, overalls, like engineers, you know. So that's very, very interesting. It's something, you know, let's get, but then you have a response to that in something like neo-expressionism in the 80s, you know, back to the human expression of things.
Yes, and look, and ultimately what I find, kind of, when we look at it meta-systemic from bird's eye view, art really is that, or creative expression. It could be literature, music, picture, you know, now we have multimedia, all of that. It's a society's reaction to its own condition, right? In each age. So we can have a descriptive language, you can have scholars writing about stuff and doing studies and whatnot in that kind of language, scientific, verifiable. But then you have the artist the artist always comments on the reality, takes reality in, filters through the filters of self-transcendence, and leaves it out there. And it's just such such a vital way of engaging with reality, because it is distorted. It's supposed to be distorted. It's supposed to be, I think it's something you cannot be objective about assessing it, because that's the very nature of it. It has to be kind of intuitive. It has to be non-scientific in that sense. But there's some very unique, like, you kind of know when art is authentic and when it's not. Like, you know, there's a real sense of commitment to the style, or a real sense of feeling the object of, you know, what's being communicated and so on. So I think I always found this time, the second half of the 20th century, where, like, such a tragedy happened, like we had both world wars, and our societies tried to recover from that, and then you have all those crazy forms, and they kind of, what does it say? What does it communicate? It communicates like creative agency trying to find its own language, but all of the meanings that were before, they're obliterated. So you have to come up with new ideas, and you see a new languages and new aesthetic criteria. So that was then, and it's useful now to look back then and see, okay, so that was the reaction to those turbulent times, and now we have kind of a reiteration of that time, but with much more powerful technology, which now, let's say, war becomes an existential threat to the whole of humanity. I mean, not even like nuclear weapons were bad enough; they were already nuclear, like an existential threat. But now we have AI, which can build ever more powerful nuclear weapons without any human, influence. So it's more like a Blade Runner reality, right? So it's actually it does remove the human being from the process of technological advancement, let's say, because now it's just runaway technology, and those engineers who, was who started who built the first, like, say, large language models, or these AIs that are now, they have no clue how they work, So it's a real challenge for an artist now, I guess, to articulate something coherent that is relevant to the time, and perhaps having your approach when you just do landscape, it's such a return to the ground reality. Absolutely. Isn't it? Something that actually gives you the reference back. Okay, so I'm here, I'm a human on Earth, I see the sun, that's the landscape. And from there you can go into more abstract, but you're back to reference square one.
Absolutely. And I think, and again, and linking this to the development of sort of art movements, 20th century, and then into sort of postmodern, or whatever we could call it now. I mean, it's a much sort of stranger reality that the validation of all kind of art forms became very important, and I think even more so with the dawning of the internet age. In modernism, in 20th century modernism, it really was movements against movements, and there would usually be one dominant movement. Impressionism slowly morphed into post-impressionism slowly. It's this kind of thing where it's one thing.
Linear. It was more linear.
It's very, very linear, yes. But ever since, there's been something where there's a validation within all of these little subcategories, and you see it even in, say, popular culture. When my parents were younger, it was like it was like mods and rockers, and they used to hate each other and go and fight each other.
Yeah, the structure of the relationships between those conventions.
Actually, and then a new counterculture would come around, and then you had the mainstream culture. So but it was a very much sort of a one could recognize it. Like you say, it's very linear. But nowadays there are so many different, say, valid forms of expression within art and within music. Music is a very similar thing that one can, like myself, just return to an old romantic tradition of landscape painting. However, I can bring in elements of Rothko, I can bring in, elements of impressionism, minimalism even. And I find that in many ways we're much freer nowadays. And if you look at Instagram, where so many artists are nowadays, that, I mean, really, you can be in your own lane in that sense of whatever you want to create. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the mainstream or within, a certain type of fashion at the time, because there isn't any anymore.
There isn't any left.
Yeah, there's myriad interpretations. And, it's interesting. I've sort of done the podcast and talked to traditional painters, impressionist painters, and we've got something in common: painting. But style, influence, approach, discipline, how we create a paint, it's completely different. But there's that one. So it's kind of, in a way, say, you know, a classical composer being able to sit down with, you know, someone who's making sort of industrial goth techno or whatever, you know, but they've got that thing in common, music. They're not enemies anymore. The AI aspect of this, Adam, I think, is important.
The what aspect?
The AI aspect.
AI aspect. Mm-hmm.
It is kind of important to artists, but I don't see it as a threat to traditional painting forms. I see it as a tool that some people may use if they want to. Or traditional painters, you know, basically mud and a stick with some hairs on the end painting it, can use in a peripheral way or in a way to aid their own practice of learning about colour, composition, form, or even promoting their work. Mm-hmm. AI will not kill painting. That's what
I agree. I think so. So there's one thing that's involving AI in the creative process itself again, and or using it to further your enterprise, which is totally fine. For me as a writer, it's like I could use, let's say, GPT summary and kind of tweak my writing, but you know what? I don't think people do realize it, but if you interface your, like when you write fully organically, that is your thinking and you're struggling with articulating that thinking in language. So each time you're doing it independently, you're actually sharpening your thinking and your cognition. You actually, you know, the workout you're doing to articulate yourself, and then it makes sense and people tell you it's coherent and maybe even like it, then that means you're learning through it and it's validated by other humans. Once you can do it faster, you can do it more efficiently if you include a machine. But then how will you know how good your own thinking is?
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. So it's like that conceptual art. Like, how do you know that person is an idiot, or are they so sophisticated but they've just gone through 20 different styles and they ended up just drawing a dot on the white, right? It's like, and because there's no way of distinguishing between a highly conceptual artist who's really very minimalistic, or someone who just exploits the convention to pretend to be one, right? And that's what I think that's what I understand as the death of art. Whenever that comes up, that's what it is for me, because it's the formatting of the aesthetic value of something in the sense that there's no way of distinguishing. In the same way, language is being formatted, like I call it neurosemantic formatting, when you have a term and it's being hijacked by like a massive corporation or a government or whatever, and it's incorporated into the discourse, like humanitarianism, you know, or ecology, or all of those, like we hear them, that, you know, people use those words, these terms, but their agenda is either completely misguided or nefarious or misinformed, right? And then who are you to tell, if you're just a little man there who happens to understand it properly, but you have no, say, budget, political power, etc., to actually explain that? No, those people don't know what they're talking about, right? So it's what is the death of art, death of language,
How about philosophy, Adam? So in that sense, because I mean, I don't think, I mean, art all the way back to the cave paintings, you know, and philosophy are probably two of the most human, you know, endeavors out there. Right. So let's think, like, say, Nietzsche, for example.
Yeah, I can see.
Would AI replace Nietzsche, or is it that he is so human?
Right. I mean, the very essence of the point is, let's go back to what you said about your presence online on Instagram amongst hundreds of thousands of artists, maybe millions, and you don't feel like you run out of your own identity because you have your own way. And even though you do the same genre, same whatever, like you do landscape, but the way you approach your landscape painting is your way. And this is what Nietzsche says too. Like, Nietzsche doesn't want you to doesn't want you to think like he thinks. He wants you to think for yourself. And see, in the world where everything gets more and more automated, like you said, there is no one trend, there is no one thing to conform with, and then you're successful, because all of that is already now taken over by automation, really. Because then what, like, see what happens on TikTok, all these shorts, when people just, yeah, so let's say this song is popular with this short, with this reel, and everyone
Yeah,
uses that song, and then yeah, so it's popular, but then it fades away and it devalues itself through the very process that made it popular, and then it's just next, 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 and as the curve exponentiates, the the next new thing becomes that much less exciting each time. So
yes,
what actually survives is when you completely ignore the trends, and you see, like you have your own style. I think the same thing goes with writing style and philosophical, where, having your own perspective on the world
yes,
is not about being right anymore, because anyone can be right and anyone can be wrong, and you can find evidence for any one perspective in
absolutely.
spades on the
Yeah,
internet. So it's not about being right, it's having a coherent perspective that people can listen to. Like, that makes sense. I don't know if he's right. I haven't checked every reference,
yeah,
but I mean, I can follow this person's train of thought. And it seems to me that, like, philosophy is to dare and be able to do what you do with painting, like, this is my style, and I'm happy to, be discarded somewhere and lose opportunities elsewhere, and lose some friends there, but this is what I do and this is how I think, and I will not be silenced, I will not be
absolutely.
censored. And
Authenticity.
yeah, I think that the integrity of it, the authenticity, and that's what Nietzsche was very big, with, is like, as long as you are consistent with you strive for your own integrity of your own thinking and your own journey. I don't know what your path is, I don't know whether you're right or wrong, but you should find out what is your adventure, what is your adventure, finding out who you are, and what is your virtue, what is your, you need to be able to really, like, sacrifice for these things, like
Yes,
like like in art as well, like in any endeavor that is meaningful. You will forge your own style
and you
through.
it's interesting, Adam, because that sort of relates to, I know, um, the Buddha also said something along those lines. Yeah, don't follow me, stop following me. Um, basically kill me, kill my ideas, find them yourself.
Right.
And and
Yeah.
and, it, and it's super important. I'll just say actually as well about that authenticity and about Instagram and art and all of that stuff. I'm part of a kind of a meta. I should have done this on the creators group. So, I got invited to be part of it because I had a certain amount of followers, and it's
Mhm.
a Facebook group where they have meta representatives on there telling you how to make better content.
Mhm.
And I was always really, really skeptical, especially in relation to the algorithm, and kind of just, made some complaints on there and put my opinion, but then decided to step back and just do my own thing. And I was noticing that what they were trying to promote was this idea of trends to get larger amounts of followers and, more interaction is follow trends, put this trending music on your reel, or hey, do a reel where you're spinning the canvas around. All of this seemed very cringe to me, so I'd never done it. And I just kept doing what I do. Just when I had a painting that I was kind of happy with, I'd just post it and just post it
Mm.
and not
Mm.
follow these trends. And my kind of follower counts went up. And also the key thing is that the engagement on those posts was very good. So, I average around on Instagram around 2,000 likes per post. Sometimes it peaks, and it had one recently, it's like 30,000 likes on it, which is crazy. So
Really?
the algorithm works in this way, and it's AI in its own way, in this way, if I use an analogy, they're like waves, you know, it's kind of like this. Every now and then you get a little set of slightly larger waves, and then you get this huge wave. You know, you've got to be in the water to do it by being authentic. But I noticed that all of the people that followed this advice and made these like trendy videos, like with, you know, the latest music, and they're spinning their canvases around and doing little dances, they would get a lot of followers. Boom! So they get this huge wave come in, they get a lot of followers, but then the engagement afterwards would drop. So you may have 100,000 followers, but you're getting 100 likes on your thing, because you're not being fucking authentic.
You know, yes, I think you see, exactly. And I think authenticity becomes, because it's so easy to fake everything, and even look at the language, look, artificial intelligence. It's not real intelligence, it's artificial. So it's a simulation of an intelligence, and that becomes cool. And then people kind of, it passes people by that it's fake. And then you meet people, and you go to places, to jobs, to, you know, to different, and faking stuff, it's normal, it's normalized now. And in a way, it's a survival strategy to be fake, to be inauthentic. You have to be really inauthentic to be really successful in any of the standard kind of ways of being successful, right? In the world.
Absolutely.
So look, so we all have to conform to some extent in order not to die with this predicament, let's call it. And what does it do? Like, it creates a great scarcity for authenticity, because it is genuinely hard to be authentic. Therefore, it's very precious. So when you manage to communicate authenticity in the way that reaches people and is recognized as such, that's gold, right? Because that means you're ready to lose those followers and not be the most popular kid, but long term you actually gain credibility, which is hardwired in us, because credibility is what made us, you know, back in the tribal days, you know, all that time back to tribal communities before the civilization emerged. We, you know, you had to have credibility with your village friends, because otherwise, like, this is how we get security, safety, survival, all of those core base, you know, survival faculties. So we, you know, that's why I think it's just our nervous systems are so confused with these new media that we have, but we still respond. Most of people are not aware of it. They don't think about it, obviously, like all this cognitive stuff going on. But the perceptions are so, with AI, I call it exponential deception. It deceives us in a subliminal way. We don't see when that happens, but we may see after the effect. Like you see, you can analyze that that wave of algorithmic kind of boosting of like, so you can spin that reality. You can create that perception because you engineered a process, let's say.
That's right.
And it's in line with the algorithmic stuff that is actually engineered too. And you put it in line, someone coordinates it, okay, it produces this result, but long term, what's left? Over the baseline, what's left is that authenticity which did not conform with the process. Right?
And that's so interesting, Adam. And my girlfriend pointed this out yesterday when we were talking about this post. So that post, and I've had it a few times, so this post has got 32,000 likes or whatever.
32,000 likes. I don't know that's even possible.
Yeah, 32,000 likes. I mean, it doesn't happen. I think it's the highest I've got. So it's so interesting. My girlfriend pointed this out to me. The painting that I actually put in it is, you know, it's a painting just with the cloud and the moon. And the caption is, now that painting doesn't exist anymore because I painted it and I was so frustrated that day. I wiped it all off and painted it. So in the caption, I've got something. I'm just going to read you the caption very quickly. So the caption to it is, so it's called, I don't know if people could see it anyway. You probably see it on Instagram. It's amazing. So it's called Lost to Time, oil on panel. And I put, in my infinite wisdom, during a moment of creative frustration, I actually painted over this some time ago. Really wish I hadn't, but these things happen. Right? 32,000 shows the
Oh,
human.
so there was this vulnerability of you failing to do it, to
Yeah.
produce anything worthwhile. And you got so much, but no, it looked great actually. It
Yeah,
looked really
it's
neat.
yeah, it's on the Facebook, and it's kind of backwards.
Ah, yeah,
But it's
it's
just a cloud
powerful.
and this sliver of the moon here, you know.
Yeah, I
But
can
if
see, but
anybody,
it's yeah, it's nice.
yeah, it's vulnerable as well. It's delicate. But if anybody wants to look at it, you know, go on my Facebook or my Instagram, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can see it. But I think it emphasizes, in a way, like what we were talking about.
Yes,
Blessed by the algorithm gods for showing human material vulnerability.
yes, man. It's just such a funny dynamic now with all these tools and us trying to kind of retain, because I think for me ultimately it's retain our humanity in this craziness, and it's kind of fun. It's good sport, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because it's only a machine. After all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's like a psychopath. They're just like a cloud of nanobots. They're not
Mm,
really
mm,
human, you know.
mm,
They're just
mm.
people who are fake self. So then AI is like a super version of that. There is
Yes.
no real self there. There is just there is just a bunch of code which operates to, according to certain clearly defined
Mm,
objectives,
mm,
instrumental goals of whatever was programmed
mm.
into it. So but it's interesting how you said you communicated something about your own humanity with the image that you have produced, and
Which no
that
longer exists
which
because
no longer even exists, right? And that, I think that uniqueness, that is the real currency now.
mm,
Like,
mm.
because yeah, you have most beautiful and fantastic things that can be automated and produced and whatnot. But what you will get less and less is that unique, human,
Yeah,
uh, human touch, human expression, human
yeah,
relationship. All of those things will be harder and harder and harder, and therefore more and more precious.
more and more precious. And with it, I mean, the amount of comments I got beneath that saying, well, you've got a photo, just paint another version. That's not how it works, you know. So they say you've got a photograph of the original. Why don't you just copy it? It doesn't work like that. Paint it. So people have commented
Ah,
beneath, you know.
so because
And
they say, so they think about the product, and you're thinking about the process.
yeah,
Process is
yeah,
part of
yeah.
that, part of the. You can't extricate. You can't see. We are so used to having things decontextualized and just presented as ready-made.
Absolutely, yeah. And they don't see the surface. And also, I wouldn't want to reproduce it because it's something that is lost to time. You know, it is not a product. And equally with it, and this is where you see, so the reproductions of art, and you know, the interesting thing about AI. I mean, if you get close to most of my paintings, I mean, you'll see brush hairs in there. You will see little smudges of fingerprints. You will see all of these imperfections that if I were to try to reproduce, say, a forgery of my own work, impossible. It's the things that, and I talk to my students a lot about this, about a good painting shows the history of its making on the surface, and that is an imperfect history, but it's a history nonetheless, and it's all about how you resolve that history to take it to a point where you step away from it. AI cannot do that. You can't. It cannot be done. It is a.
Well, it can simulate it at
It can
best again,
stimulate.
right? So it can represent it, but it cannot be it. It's like again, Osho said, I loved it when he said, all artists are sick people, really. Because like if you're fully adjusted, you don't have to do art. You just
That's what.
go and do your job, right? But artists, philosophers, people who think too much,
Yeah.
have to create in order to survive. the imperfection is such a deeply humane, attribute, or it's just a condition. It's a deeply humane condition of you, and you don't want it perfected. So what you get with technology is that it can perfect everything. It can, and then it ends up being, like people build the same. You go to an estate and every house looks the same, and you go to a supermarket, hypermarket, and you get everything's produced the same. And it's like you already saw that in industrial technology, but now we have digital technologies doing the same thing not with objects, not with physical objects anymore, but with humans' own thinking. So that's what I call, it's this algorithmic brainwashing, like formatting people's thinking and perceptions. So, and it becomes then like a hegemonic, synthetic way of attending to the world. So, like you said, you can't fake an idiosyncrasy, right? It's supposed to be imperfect. That's what's beautiful about it. That's what when you listen to a rock band from the 70s, psychedelic rock or something, and then it's not it doesn't keep to the meter. They go faster and slower or whatever, and that's what's or you hear mistakes, because they were on drugs and they slip, and that becomes an iconic kind of moment when the fans really dig that mistake. And that is what is actually, I think, insane in teaching, isn't it? When you teach and you just come out like someone, you make a stupid mistake and you laugh at yourself like, well, great, at least I'm not a machine, right? Like I misspell something, and when I teach, a language, it's like
absolutely.
And that's great. That's great. That means I'm still learning. I'm still fallible. That's beautiful. It'd be very boring to want to be perfect.
And your students connect. They see you as a human. They see someone who has learnt to get to the point that you are, where you can teach it. I mean, in my teaching, and this is why I like doing it live and don't like making a highly polished YouTube video where I say, and I've done this, and I take out all of the, the problems. But if I'm doing it on Zoom live, or even, I'll often I said, this is not going how I wanted it to go. But I always say, then let me try and show you how I get out of this situation, how I navigate this mistake that I've just made, So it's showing that actually it's I'm just a learner as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And I always felt like this since I spent my life in education, and I've always felt like a learner. And I think that's been so powerful. And like role modeling for people who learn from you. Well, yeah. And like you say, navigating through that situation, you're actually demonstrating the interest in learning.
Oh, definitely. And showing that vulnerability as well of people he's taken the course, he's perfected it.
Yes, I think obviously you need a certain degree of confidence and self-confidence in your expertise to get there, because obviously it's not easy to be vulnerable if you don't believe yourself to be competent in what you do. But I think the whole thing about imperfection being a human, I don't want to say quality, a human, intrinsically human, imperfection, and it's great. I think it's something that really creates the contrast to really show you that what we don't have to be. We already are good as well. We are whole. We don't need to be perfected. We're not a bloody car,
I mean, obviously, and you were saying this earlier about there are automated things which will help, create a quote easier life, but it's this is what I find fascinating about AI and automation, and when they say that truck drivers, we won't need truck drivers at some point, or people in supermarkets. What are people going to do with the time that is spared, you know, does it become purely a knowledge economy? Then, you know, not everybody is, you know, going to be within that. And this is where I think, you know, I could maybe be a little bit optimistic about certain elements of AI, that, you know, most things are kind of, and in many ways, you know, they are. I lived on a boat for a while in London, and coming and lighting the fire every night was, you know, it was difficult, getting wood and lighting it. You know, now go home, switch the heater on, one part of my day kind of sorted.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have sort of evolved as a species, as a human species, to have these tools that help us. However, it's then, what do you do with the time you have that's been spared because of these technologies? Do you just sit and now watch, you know, reality TV show or these endless things, or TikTok, or, you know, is it now, since AI, you just sort of got an AI friend that kind of chats to you every night? Or do you do very human things?
Right.
Do you go and climb mountains and put yourself through difficulties? Do you try and paint? Do you try and learn analog things and really push yourself up in a Nietzschean way, you know, push yourself against those difficult obstacles and grow, you know, spiritually, philosophically, psychologically through it? Or do you just, you know, have your AI
crawl into your pod?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think this will be the choice. I think this will be the choice. Ultimately, there will be both options available. And those people who believe, you know, people talk about, oh, passive income, man, I still need to go to work. It's like, you will work, you always, I mean, I realized, like, you always have to do work. I mean, work should be pleasure. Like, you should do work that's meaningful to you. Then you don't see it as work. But I think most of people have meaningless jobs, and then they consider that to be, they just want to do, not to do any work and just go and travel and be happy all the time. But you will, is like Alan Watts' thought experiment is exactly referring to what you're talking about. It's, if everything is easy, everything's nice, you will want to introduce difficulty in your life, because it's just, there's no challenge, there's no sense of achievement, there's no sense of, you know, there's no sense of fulfillment if you don't, or if there's no, back to Nietzsche, self-overcoming. You have to overcome your weaknesses. You have to know that you can transcend something. That means that can't be easy, you know, like anything that can be had easily is not worth having, you know, the saying. And I think it's so true, isn't it? It's like, yeah, that doesn't mean we should, you know, push the stone up the hill and make it roll again all the time. That's the, you know, the other extreme. But I think, like you said, we will have every, like, our choices of exponential of technological support and assistance maybe, you know, expanding. And now there will be a choice of, okay, so to which ones of these am I happy to automate? For example, I'm happy to automate my accounting, because that's not an area of life I want to be, I care about being proficient in. So I will have software for that. I will have like maybe my like IT staff. I'd like someone to also look after that. It doesn't make sense for me to invest my energy, which is, you know, wisely used somewhere where I'm more expertise in. So what is it for you? And that will make people focus on what is meaningful. So that, which is, because meaning is like, we have all the information, but we don't have the kind of existential meaning, right? The meaning that of why am I here? What makes me, what floats my boat? And I think it will really make people, it will force people to decide what it is that they're ready to struggle for, because it's so meaningful, and what other things they can automate and, you know, relegate to machines and technologies, so they don't have to worry about that anymore. Because why should you, right? We shouldn't have to have a meaningless job.
No. And that's where life is. I'm going to have to go in a minute.
Yeah, we can.
But, you know, life is really about meaning making. And I mean, you see this problem often happens with people who win the lottery you know, but suddenly get a lot of money. But there's always this idea of struggle that, you know, that's what you're looking for, security all your life. That's why you work, that's why you invest, why you do this. Then often when that is taken away, there's this sort of melancholic kind of, you know, almost existential crisis that happens, because, you know, life in many ways loses its meaning. And it can take a long time to craft that new meaning. And I think, you know, again, that's why I'm sort of with AI in its sort of benign kind of manifestations, quite optimistic that, you know, if it can help facilitate the human authenticity through imperfection and striving and stuff, through, say, visual mediums, music, or, you know, through writing, poetry, and things like that, and it can free up some more time for that, then cool, you know, that's good. Now, there are all of those other aspects of AI which do provide an existential to that, not only meaning itself, but life itself, you know, and that's the next level of it.
Totally, yeah. So I think in some ways it will free up this time and we'll be able to do that, but then also it will create seductive, sugar-coated distractions for all those people who can't be bothered, and they will be sucked into it. And yeah, I mean, some people just end up like that, I guess, and like the most powerful drug ever. And I think with technocracy and you know, the big power, how they try to automate our behavior and everything, that will create a real threat against creativity, which then will force creativity to evolve and consciousness to evolve. I think that if there's anything that can really make us evolve as quick as we have to evolve in order to survive as humans, that must be the really terrible moloch of technocracy that's coming our way. So yeah, ultimately, I think it's the suffering that it will cause will liberate us into a completely different ways of self-expression and consciousness. So, Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Great to talk, man. Just something that it will not kill painting, then. So.
It will not kill painting, no way, or music, or language for that matter, I think.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you, man.
Pleasure.
And look forward to talking again soon.
Definitely. We'll do another one. Cheers.
See you later, Adam. Bye.
Bye.